What did we talk about in our last class? We talked about two covenants. Am I correct? We talked about blood covenants, right? Now, name to me the first covenant we talked about. Abraham's covenant. Now, what led up to it? What caused Yahweh or Jehovah or God to enter into a covenant? What led him to tell Abraham or Abram to get those animals and split them in half? He asked him what?
How do I know?
Yeah, how do I know that you're going to do all these wonderful things for me? Yes?
Whatever happens to the animals, let that happen to you.
Exactly. And so the act of splitting the animals and reciting the terms of the agreement and walking through the bloody pathway said exactly what you said. If I violate any of the terms of this agreement, let what happened to these animals happen to me. Tell me about the second blood covenant that we talked about. Yes. The Mosaic covenant or the Sinai covenant, also known as the Old Covenant, and I'll show you why it's called the Old Covenant in a minute. Yes?
Isn't it considered the Old Covenant because it's the offspring of Abraham?
No. In fact, Abraham's covenant and that covenant are actually different. Very different, much more precise. It is specific to the children of Israel, which were Abraham's. Israel is one of Abraham's grandsons. His name actually used to be Jacob. It was changed to Israel. And so when we call them Israelites or the children of Israel, we're talking about the children that came from Jacob's family. But you have other grandsons. You have Esau. You have a lot of grandsons that came from Abraham. But that covenant at Sinai is specific to the Israelites, okay? And the requirements, see, now I pointed something out about Abraham's covenant. Did Abraham actually enter into the covenant? No, he didn't. He was asleep. But notice with the Sinai covenant, the people actually entered into that covenant. Do you see the difference there? The blood was sprinkled on them. Okay? And so we're going to move on from here. I just want to remind you of that. I turned the lights on, just kind of wake you up because I got to turn them back off again because we're going back to the screen. But we want to look at another covenant. Now, I don't know, how far did we go? Did we talk about David and Solomon and all those guys last class? We did. And we did talk about the fact that the nation split into two separate. That's where we ended. And did we talk about their constant idolatry? And then did I finally talk about Nebuchadnezzar and coming in?
You started.
That's where I started. Well, some significant time after David and Solomon's reign, we want to mention. I did talk about Zionism, didn't I? Okay, so we want to go back for a moment to the time when Israel is really not doing what it's supposed to do. It's violating the covenant, and God allows for other nations to occupy and come in and take their land, kill their kings, and so on. And they strongly desired that God would send another king, send a Messiah to reestablish them as a kingdom. And that's kind of where we want to start today. So I'm going to turn these lights off because there's another covenant that is introduced that I need to talk about. Okay. All right. In Jeremiah chapter 31, starting at verse 31 to 34, and Jeremiah is writing just about the time when Nebuchadnezzar is getting ready to attack Israel and Judah. And Jeremiah both tells them that you're going to go into captivity, but while he's telling them that you're going to go into captivity, he's now told to give this prophecy to Israel. I'm going to read it. It says, "The time is coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah." Notice he mentions both kingdoms, Israel and Judah. "It will not be like the covenant I made with their forefathers when I took them by the hand to lead them out of Egypt, because they broke my covenant, though I was a husband to them, declares the Lord." So clearly he's saying a couple of things in that next sentence. He's saying, number one, I'm going to make a new covenant, but it will be completely different from the covenant that I made with them when I led them by the hand to lead them out of Egypt. What covenant is he referring to there? The Sinai covenant. He says, number one, it's not going to be like that covenant. And he says why? He says because they did what? They broke it. Okay? You didn't do like I told you. Every time I turned around, you were doing something that I told you specifically not to do. And so I'm going to do a new covenant. I'm going to do a different one. It's not going to be the same. It's a different covenant. I want you to get that clear. All right? And so now he begins to describe the covenant and define the covenant. It's a very interesting covenant. "This is the covenant I will make with the house of Israel after that time, declares the Lord. I will put my laws in their minds and write it on their hearts. I will be their God and they will be my people. No longer will a man teach his neighbor or a man his brother, saying, 'Know the Lord,' because they will all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord. For I will forgive their wickedness and remember their sin no more." Basically, there are three provisions of this new covenant, and I want to put it on this board here. Number one, I list this sentence last because that 4 suggests to me that these other provisions really can't take place until he deals with this problem here. Okay? And that word "for" says, it's like he's saying, I'm going to do these things because I do this thing. The first provision is this. He says, I will deal with the sin problem myself. That's basically what he's saying. I will deal with the sin problem myself. The second provision is up here. I will put my law in their minds and write it on their hearts. I will be their God and they will be my people. The second provision basically says this: I will change their inner motivations myself. I'm going to do some things. He says through another prophet, I'm going to do radical surgery. I'm going to take out a heart of stone and put in a heart of flesh. I'm going to put my spirit in you and all this kind of stuff. And so he basically says, first I'm going to deal with this problem, because this was the problem all along. You couldn't do like I told you to do. So I'm not leaving that up to you this time. I'm going to do it myself. I'll forgive your iniquities and remember them no more. But not only am I going to do that, but I'm going to change your internal motivations. So I'm going to deal with the things you've done. Now I'm going to deal with the way you think and act and respond and how what motivates you. And then the third thing is this. He says, no longer will a man teach his neighbor and a man his brother, saying, know the Lord, because they will all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord. He says, basically, this provision says, I will communicate directly with everyone. That's not. Myself. Up until this time, if a person really wanted to have some kind of direct communion with God, they had to specifically go to a person called a prophet. You had to literally go to his house and say, listen, Mr. Prophet, I need to ask God something. And so could you do me a favor and go ask God, should I do this or that or a third thing? Technically, even kings would do that. David used to go to the prophet when he was going to war and say, first, he would ask the prophet to go ask God, should I go to battle against these people? And will you be with me when I go? And so the prophet would go find out and come back and tell him. And then David would say after that, so, okay, since I can go, which way should I go? Should I attack him here or should I attack him there? And the prophet would go back and ask. So it was a very, you had to deal with a prophet to talk to God, to get communication with God. What he's saying here is radical, because now you don't go to a prophet, but I'll deal direct with everybody, myself. Now, this is a covenant now that he's introducing to the house of Israel and house of Judah. Can you see or can you deduce what this is? All these things God is saying he's going to do himself. What is he asking for the people to do? Can you see what he's asking for? What is yes?
For them to not say anymore.
Yeah, well, he's asking them not to, and he's saying he's not going to leave that up to them anymore. He doesn't ask them anything about doing anything. He says he lists all these things that he's going to do. So what is he asking in return? Yes?
Does he ask them for them to have faith in them?
Very good. Rarely do I ever get that answer. This is a covenant of faith. Basically, he's saying, the only thing I'm asking you to do is to believe I'm going to do this. And I need to give you a definition for faith. This is something I teach, and this is a biblical definition for faith. And so you can write this down. This is not testable, but this is something I always throw in at this point, because a lot of people use this word but have no real good definition for it. So let me give you a definite. Man, you cold, huh? He looked like he put on his hoodie, man. Okay, let's get this definition real quick, and I'm gonna keep moving because I want to talk about kings and kingdoms right after this. Write this down. Faith is the affirmative, that's a V and an E, and active response to something God has said. It's a D. Make sure you understand that. Can you see it? Yeah.
So this is the commandment. Well, this is the law. Well, this is what he put in motion with Moses and the Ten Commandments.
No, the Ten Commandments was the old covenant. We covered that in the class before. Okay, and I've recorded it so I can give you a copy of the CD, so you can understand. The old covenant was a list of 10 commands. And we just talked about the fact that he refers to it here in this part of this sentence. He says, that covenant is not the covenant I'm dealing with now. The reason why I'm not dealing with that covenant, because they broke it. And so I'm doing a different covenant, a new covenant that's completely different from that covenant. All right? Because I had a problem with them with that other covenant. Okay, so when we talk about the Sinai covenant, this covenant is what he's referring to. Yes?
So you're saying that supposedly we're not supposed to follow the Ten Commandments anymore?
I didn't say that. But I am saying that. I didn't say that, and I'm not saying that. He's saying that. He's saying not that you have to not follow the Ten Commandments. And I can get into more detail about that if you want to ask me after class. All right? But by introducing this new covenant, when we look at it in the New Testament, which we're going to do in a few minutes, you're going to notice that they make statement after statement that is no longer the standard by which they operate. Yes? Jeremiah is a prophet. Very definitely a prophet, yes. Say again? There's a guy named Jeremiah in your class?
Jeremiah is a bullfrog and he's a good friend of mine.
Yes, Jeremiah was a bullfrog. That's how it went. That's how the song went. I can find it online. We can play it after this is over with. Okay? Now, let me explain this little thing here that I'm going to move quickly on. There are two things that you have to have faith. At least three things. First of all, faith has to be initiated by something that's been said by God. It is not something that somebody says, or I think, or if I pray real hard, it's going to happen. No. Faith must begin with something he said. And there are three things he said here. One, I'm going to deal with a sin problem myself. Two, I'm going to change your internal wiring. I'm going to change you inside. And that takes a lot of believing, because I've lived with me a long time. You know what I mean? And it's hard to believe that something that you can't see, feel, or touch is going to actually make all these transitions inside of you. And thirdly, I'm going to find a way to have direct access and communication with you. These three things he's asking you to believe because he said so. And so faith is two things. After you come to understand, okay, you said this. First thing is having an affirmative response. Affirmative means simply agreeing or saying yes. Okay, I agree. Okay, you'll do that. Fine. That's a mental thing. The other part of it is having an active response. That is to act on that belief. It is not enough to think it, and I'll give an illustration. God tells Moses, when he's backed up against the wall, two mountains on either side, and the Pharaoh's army bearing down on him. And God tells him, I want you to go through this water. Faith is saying, okay, I agree, but it's also saying, okay, let me step in this water and see what's going to happen. So it requires the mental agreement, but it also requires you to act on the thing that you've been told. Yes, ma'am.
For the sin part, where does it say, isn't it where you're supposed to, ask for forgiveness and then God gives forgiveness?
Sure.
Because that's how it makes it seem like he just gives it to you.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't make it seem like that, because a lot of the things that you're asking about right now are things that I'm going to talk about in a few minutes. All right. But he establishes a covenant whereby the asking becomes possible. That's the point. It is, and maybe I can answer it this way. This part here is available for the asking. And so maybe that's what you're trying to get at. Okay? And so all of the things that we find Paul writing in the New Testament all points back to these three basic areas of agreement that God has established. And notice it's established for the house of Israel and the house of Judah. He's still dealing with the Jews, because it's through the Jews that access comes to the Gentiles. And we'll show that in a few minutes. Okay? Okay, so is this clear? Now, let me show you something interesting. This covenant, well, I can go to Hebrews, but before I go to Hebrews, let me point something out here. Isaiah, who's another prophet who's writing not roughly 100 years or so before Jeremiah writes, he writes this prophecy about the servant of the Lord, which is, and we're starting the transition to this idea of the Messiah. And I'm going to explain to you what the Messiah is before we leave here today. And in Isaiah chapter 42, verses 1-7, he talks about the Messiah, this Messiah that is coming. And I'll explain what the Messiah is in just a second. Here's my servant. This is Isaiah 42, 1-7. Here's my servant whom I uphold, my chosen one in whom I delight. I will put my spirit on him. He will bring justice to the nations. He will not shout or cry out or raise his voice in the streets. A bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not snuff out. In faithfulness he will bring forth justice. The word justice in Hebrew is also righteousness. He will also bring righteousness. He will not falter or be discouraged until he establishes justice. And please again understand, in Hebrew, justice and righteousness are the same thing on earth. In his law, the islands will put their hope. This is what God the Lord says. He who created the heavens and stretched them out, who spread out the earth and all that comes out of it, who gives breath to its people and life to those who walk in it. I, the Lord, have called you, again referring to this servant, which is another term for the Messiah, in righteousness. I will take hold of your hand. Now, this is the phrase I want you to see. I will keep you and will make you to be a covenant for the people and a light for the Gentiles, to open eyes that are blind, to free captives from prison, and to release from the dungeon those who sit in darkness. This is a key phrase because this is exactly how it's written in the Hebrew. He does not say, I will make a covenant with you. He says, I will make you to be the covenant. Do you see that? Okay. And so this is one of the scriptures among many in the Old Testament that led people to believe that this Messiah would not only just be the covenant recipient, but he would also be the covenant sacrifice. I will make you to be the covenant. You are the covenant itself. In other words, your person. When we go to Isaiah chapter 53, and he talks about he will be bruised for our transgressions and all that kind of stuff. When we get to the New Testament, these guys start pointing to him, this Messiah that they believed was the Messiah. He was the covenant itself, not just something written down somewhere. He was both the recipient and the covenant sacrifice himself. Are you following what I'm saying? Okay, let's move on. Quickly, I want to go to now the New Testament, and where we see this same idea in Hebrews. Good. It's a good point for questions. Yes.
The Messiah's covenant was before the new one, correct?
No, the Messiah's covenant and the new covenant is the same covenant.
Okay.
Or did I confuse you there? The covenant that is being referred to in Isaiah is the new covenant. And every covenant, okay, let's back up. Every covenant that we've talked to about heretofore involved certain elements. What were some of those elements? Some kind of a sacrifice. Something died. Okay? The heifer and all of those different things with Abraham, those animals died in the process of establishing that covenant. When we go to Sinai, we had all of these bulls and oxen and stuff that were killed, that were slaughtered because you had to collect the blood. There had to be some blood involved in that particular covenant as well. The new covenant, or the covenant that was described in Jeremiah, if it's going to be the same kind of covenant, must also involve some type of sacrifice, because some blood somewhere has to be applied in the context of, validating and putting into effect this covenant. Yes.
But the reason behind in these covenants here, they don't use animals anymore because it was stated that that blood was no longer good enough, which is why this covenant was.
You're talking about in Hebrews it says,
Yeah.
the blood. Yeah. Well, what it says is, what it's not that it wasn't good enough. What it was saying is that the distinction of this covenant is that he did not use the blood of bulls and goats, but he used the precious blood of Christ. That's what it says basically in Hebrews. And so this covenant, and in the context of Hebrews, he's basically saying about 5 or 6 different ways how this covenant is better than the older covenant. You see, and so the fact that the blood that was used was not bulls and bullocks and goats and all that kind of stuff, but the fact that it used this person's blood, a perfect sacrifice, then that makes this covenant even superior to the other covenant. I think that's what he was saying in Hebrews, if you read that. All right, and so here's how New Testament believers, Christians, take those words right out of Jeremiah and apply it to what they're believing. And I'll explain how this applies to Christ in a few minutes. Okay? For if nothing, this is Hebrews chapter 8, verse 7 to 13. For if there had been nothing wrong with the first covenant, what's the first covenant that he's referring to? The old covenant, the Sinai covenant. This is how he starts. If there had been nothing wrong with the first covenant, no place would have been sought for another. But God found fault with the people and said, the time is coming, declares the Lord. Notice he goes right into Jeremiah and starts to quote from Jeremiah. The time is coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel, with the house of Judah. It will not be like the covenant I made with their forefathers when I took them by the hand to lead them out of Egypt, because they did not remain faithful to my covenant. And I turned away from them, declares the Lord. This is the covenant I will make with the house of Israel. After that time, declares the Lord, I will put my laws in their minds and write them on their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people. No longer will a man teach his neighbor or a man his brother, saying, know the Lord, because they will all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, for I will forgive their wickedness and remember their sin no more. Now that C there, just a note saying that that's where this is taken from Jeremiah 31 through 34. Look at verse 13, he says, by calling this covenant new, he has made the first one obsolete. That's a powerful statement. And what is obsolete is aging and will soon disappear. He's talking about the old covenant. This is not something that's running concurrent together. It's not something that's a fulfillment of or an attachment to another covenant. It's a different covenant that makes the first covenant irrelevant and obsolete. That's the language of the Hebrews writer, who's writing to Jews, trying to tell them, whatever that was that y'all were doing before, we got something new here, and it's better. Okay? And so this is the establishment of a new covenant. All right? So let's move on. I don't want to spend too much time on this because I want to talk to you about the Messiah. What does the term Messiah mean? Say again? Son of God. He is the Son of God, but that's not what Messiah means. Nope. Not messenger. Yes? Resurrected? Nope. Someone who what?
Who leads?
Who leads? He is someone who leads, but the term Messiah doesn't mean that.
Word of God.
Nope. He says word of God. Nope. Let me stop playing with you and get you down to tell you exactly what the term Messiah means. The word Messiah means, nope, anointed. Well, it means that you're chosen, but specifically in terms of the language, the word Messiah and Christ actually both mean the same thing. The word Messiah means anointed one in Hebrew. The term Christ means anointed one in Greek. Christos means the anointed one. Now, the reason why the term anointed is important is because in Hebrew culture and in Hebrew history, the only persons that are physically anointed, is this tight on tight? Okay. Is a person that God, through a prophet, selects to high office in the kingdom. Primarily, when you're selected to be the king, the prophet takes oil, fills it into a hollowed out horn, and pours it on your head. That's why I want to make sure it was going to leak on you. So that when you are selected as king, the anointing or having anointed oil poured on your head symbolizes and separates you out. Someone said a leader. It does, it indicates that God has arbitrarily and sovereignly selected this person to be king and to lead his people. I saw your hand and then I'll come back to you. Go ahead.
I was saying, is that the same thing like what happened with David?
That's exactly where I'm going. Okay, what was your question?
So with Jesus' name, well, Jesus Christ would be
No, his name was Jesus, and Christ was his title. Jesus, the anointed one. That's what that means when you say Jesus, Christ, you're saying Jesus, who was the anointed one. All right? Do you follow me now? See, so one of the things I'm a stickler for is what does the word actually mean? And then, and when you do that, you get a better understanding of what they're actually saying. Now, this is the story of when David was anointed, and I'm not going to take the time to read it, but it's found in 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 1 to 13. But by the time we get to the point where David shows up at verse 13, it says, "So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers. And from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came upon David in power. Samuel then went to Ramah." I think he lived back in Ramah. That's where he went on back home after he did his duty. Okay? And so the point is that it is not just that that the term is anointed, but is anointed to occupy or to be in a very important position, and that is the position of king. When you're anointed in Israel, that means God has selected you to be king. Do you follow me? So when they call Jesus the Messiah, they're calling him not Savior, not anything other than the anointed king, exactly like David was anointed king. Do you see what I'm saying? Remember what I told you. When they were occupied by and attacked by, and their kingdom was taken over by the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Greeks, the Persians, and the Romans, what did Jews want more than anything else? They wanted God to raise up another king like David. And so to be called the Messiah means that you were called to be a king like David, who every time he went to battle, he never lost. Now, why is this important? I'll tell you why this is important, is because the whole concept of kingdom and king is something that begins in Israel, but it goes all the way through the Middle Ages. We start talking about Charlemagne and all these other kings. Every one of those kings believed that they were a king anointed by God to do what God wanted them to do in the earth. Do you follow what I'm saying? And so every king had this idea, and you might want to write this thing down. Every king had the concept of the divine right of kings. That whether you were Israelite or Russian, or you were Prussian or French or Italian, if you said you were, even when it came down to Caesar believed that he was emperor, the ruler of Rome, by command of the gods, which is why people would obey the king without question. Are you following me? So this concept of king and what a God and the God's connection to that is very, very rooted in that whole region, not just among the Jews. But, and let me say this. Let's say, for argument's sake, what's your name again? Say again? Austin. Austin is king of a kingdom over here. And I'm king of a kingdom over here. Okay? And there's a border between our kingdoms. But Oscar, you said Oscar, right? Austin, Texas. Austin. Okay. Austin says, well, that border's wrong because my kingdom actually comes all the way over to here. And I say, well, no, it ain't. Your kingdom stops right over here. How do we settle that? Why is warfare the way kings settle disagreements? Not just dominance, but there's something else. Blood, yes, but there's what?
Because who wins is who God is with.
That's exactly right. It's because if the gods declared me king over a territory, then when I go to war against you, I'm going to show you whose God is real. So that when David is standing up against Goliath, when they're getting ready to fight, what are they boasting about? Who's got the biggest muscles? Whose God is greater? I'm going to show you. Your God ain't nothing. That's basically when they're standing up selling their wolf tickets before they fight. They're not talking about who's the strongest and who's the mightiest and all that. They're talking about whose God is greater. Okay? And so kings go to war because it is not to show who has the best artillery, who has the best army, whose Marines and all that are better. No, it's about whose God is behind them and if the God that I serve is greater than your God. Yes.
And then afterwards they get their territory, right?
Oh yeah, not only will they get their territory, but they will kill that king. The other side of that whole argument is this, is that if my God is strong and protects me and I'm the king established, and I'm going to explain to you what kingdom is in a minute, then there's no way anybody can hurt me because my God not only gives me territory, but he physically protects my person. You can't touch me. Yes.
Is that why people were afraid to overthrow the king?
Absolutely. Because the gods were behind the king. So to attack the king is to attack who? The gods who put him there. Do you follow me? You see? So kingdom is a very, very, very important idea in this region and it is connected to religion. Even when we leave Israel, we go into other places. These kings all believe that the gods placed us there. That whole concept of the divine right of kings lasts well into the Middle Ages. Okay? So, and I'll show you what I mean. Now, I'll give you an example of it. I think I have one right here. Let me see. Let me tell you a definition. This is my definition for kingdom. Kingdom is the extension of a deity's authority over a particular region, and the king is the bodily expression and personification of that authority. Do you follow that idea? I'll leave it up there so you can write it down. It's I just changed it. I just changed the PowerPoint. I'm going to upload it today, and it's going to be online. But this is what a king is. The word king, and actually the word kingdom, means a king's authority, a king's dominion. It involves territory, but it's more than just the territory that he rules over. It is his capacity to command and people obey. And what gives him that capacity to command is the deity behind him. You disobey him, you're not disobeying him. You're disobeying the one who established him. So kingdom is the extension of a deity's authority over a region, and a king is the bodily expression and personification of that authority. Let me show you an example of that. Okay? There's this concept called suzerain-vassal relationship. Okay? A suzerain is a great king, powerful, mighty king. Let's say King Nebuchadnezzar is considered a great king. Who would be considered a great king or a great power in modern, in today's?
But power?
Power. Let's not talk, because we don't talk much about kingdom in the modern era.
Oh.
Obama.
Yeah, the United States. Obama, right? And then what great powers or great kings do is they align themselves with smaller kings and smaller nations and build alliances between them. Okay? In the United States situation, we have what is known as NATO, where we basically dominate NATO, you know. And then say what? North Atlantic, I think that's right. Treaty or organization, I don't know, I can't remember the exact, but the point is this. A suzerain, the suzerain is the great king, the big dog, the one who has all the power, the authority. He has great territory, great might, great wealth, great armies. But then you have what are known as vassal kings, who are smaller kings, very dependent, very small territory. Oftentimes, the suzerain will establish a relationship with a vassal king, and the vassal king's responsibility is to obey and do what the suzerain asks them to do. Often, the suzerain will require tribute or taxes that you have to send to the suzerain in exchange for his protection. If someone attacks one of his vassal kings, then the suzerain will come against whoever comes against them. So people know not to mess with him, don't mess with him, don't mess with him, because big boy gonna come deal with you. Go ahead, you had a question.
Like the government of each of the states as a vassal.
Yeah, but when we're talking about it during the time of David, and we're basically talking about kings and kingdoms, Moabites, the Philistines, and yeah, okay, yes. Yes, good.
Is that kind of like how the U.S. helps the Afghanistan people?
I don't know how much we're helping them, but yes, it's kind of like, I don't know if we're doing as much help as we're supposed to be doing. All right, now let me show you an example of this suzerain vassal relationship in Jeremiah chapter 27, verses 1 to 6. I want you to listen carefully and see if you can identify who the suzerain is, who the vassal kings are, and so on, okay? Early in the reign of Zedekiah, son of Josiah, king of Judah, this word came to Jeremiah from the Lord. This is what the Lord said to me. Make a yoke out of straps and crossbars and put it on your neck. And then send word to the kings of Edom, Moab, Ammon, Tyre, and Sidon through the envoys who have come to Jerusalem to Zedekiah, king of Judah. Give them a message to their masters and say, this is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. Tell this to your masters. With my great power and outstretched arm, I made the earth and its people and the animals that are on it, and I give it to anybody I please. I can almost hear that song. It's my prerogative. Okay. Okay. Now, I will hand all of your countries to my servant, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. I will make even the wild animals subject to him. That's a bad statement right there. These guys are all meeting and they thinking, he basically says, I'm getting ready to hand all your countries over to him. And the dogs, the cats, the rats, the roaches, everything is subject to Nebuchadnezzar. Who's the vassal? Who's the suzerain in this situation? In the context of these guys, yes. The other kingdoms, he becomes the suzerain. But who is Nebuchadnezzar's suzerain? God. You see how this works? God just arbitrarily grabs this dude and says, I'm making you boss over all them. Anybody hits you, they're hitting me. I deal with them. And see how this suzerain vassal relationship established. Now I have a question. Who was the first king that God ever established on the earth? That's in Israel.
Oh, that he established on the earth?
On the earth.
Jesus.
Nope. Who is the first king that God ever established on the earth? Had to be. I'll show you. See, this is where the anointed one becomes very important, because I'm going to show you how this comes into play. The very first king is mentioned in Genesis. And notice the language. We just talked about Nebuchadnezzar, and he says, I'm making even the wild animals subject to him. Listen, look at this. Then God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness, and let them do what? Rule. What does a king do? Rule. Over what? The fish of the seas, the birds of the air, and over the livestock, over all earth. Look at that, the same language. I will make all of the animals subject to him. God creates a planet, places someone there, and then establishes that person as their vassal. Okay? All right? Let me show you another place. Now, how does this relate to the Messiah? You'll see in a moment. When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, and the moon and the stars, which you have set in place. This is Psalms 8, verses 3 to 8. What is man that you're mindful of him, and the Son of Man that you... What's the big deal about man? You made him a little lower, and this statement here is wrong. It says heavenly beings. If you're reading a King James, it says you're a little lower than the angels. That is not properly translated. The word in the Hebrew is Elohim. And so you made him lower than God, not angels. So the actual pecking order is God, man, angels, not God, angel, man. Okay? And so you made him little lower than yourself and crowned him with glory and honor. You made him ruler over the works of your hands, all the flocks and all the beasts of the field, the birds of the air and the fish of the sea. And so the same language. He's saying, I set man up as my vassal. And just like he said, I'll make even the wild animals subject to him. That's the same language that is used right here. And it's talking about Adam. Yes?
So were humans made first or were angels?
No, I think angels predated humans.
Yeah.
I think they predated, but that doesn't make them superior to us. My view is that Jews could not wrap their head around man being just under God. And so instead of translating that properly by using the term Elohim, a little lower than God, somebody said, well, we're going to stick angels in there because we don't think man is that. But the original Hebrew actually says Elohim, and everybody knows Elohim refers to God. Yes?
So that's why when people say they're guardian angel, usually when you're guarding someone, it's your superior.
That's correct. You're absolutely right. That's correct. That's the right way to see it. Okay? And so so this is one of the reasons why I like doing this kind of stuff in college, because I want to point out to you that there are times the stuff you read in the book, if you do your homework, you'll discover that they make mistakes. There are mistakes being made. And sometimes it's just a cowardly attempt not to say something that you don't really think, you don't believe, but what you believe is irrelevant, translate it accurately. And so, and when you look at it that way, then you kind of see how man is very important to God in the context of Hebrew thought. Man is extremely important to God because he's just he is his vassal. Do you see what I'm saying? Okay. All right. So now how does this relate to Christ? Because when we get to Christ in the New Testament, I want to deal with how Jews deal with Jesus. Now, here comes the Jews had been in occupation for perhaps maybe 400 or 500 years. And here comes this, carpenter's son, who people begin to say, we've found the Messiah. He didn't show up with no army, or he didn't start fighting, or he didn't kill a Goliath, or he didn't do any of that stuff. And so when they start going and to listen to what he's saying, instead of him trying to muster up an army, he starts saying stuff like, if somebody slap you on one cheek, turn and let him slap the other. That's not how David would have done stuff. He says in another place, love your enemies, do good to them that persecute you. What? We're being taxed, we're being beaten, we're being abused by these foreigners in our land, and you're saying let them smack us on the other side of the cheek? You're telling us to love our neighbor, love our enemies and stuff? You cannot be the Messiah, because what we're looking for in a Messiah is a warrior like David. You're talking all this spiritual love stuff. And so for many people in Jerusalem and in Judea and Samaria and all of the regions around Jerusalem, they were having a hard time really believing that this guy could possibly be the Messiah, because they were looking for political and national deliverance They were not looking for deliverance from sin or any of that stuff. We wanted somebody to come in here and show Rome the door and put Rome in its place. But the people that believed in Jesus said he was the Messiah because he could command things, and there was nothing that he commanded that did not obey what he told it to do. When he commanded sickness, according to his disciples, sickness left. One time they're on a boat and a big storm jumped up, and he steps up in the front of the boat and he rebukes the winds and the waves, and the winds and the waves did exactly what he told it to do. Okay? And so his disciples actually looking at each other like, what kind of dude is this? He commands the winds and the waves and they obey what he's saying. And they began to ascribe that to maybe he is the Messiah, because there's nothing that he speaks to that doesn't, even demons do exactly what he says. He one time he's walking through a grove of fig trees, and he gets angry at a fig tree and rebukes it, and then the fig tree withers up and dies. And so they're beginning to see this capacity to command and things obey, that they're beginning to say, this guy really is this is the Messiah. In one case, he had raised a bunch of people from the dead, but in one particular case that was hard to argue with was when his friend Lazarus died. According to Jewish thought, when a person dies, their spirit hovers around their body for about 3 days. And then after the third day, it leaves. In the case of Lazarus, Jesus shows up at Lazarus's tomb on the fourth day, which means there's no real way to reunite spirit and body again, because that spirit is gone. And this dude calls the guy's name, and the dude comes out of the tomb and comes back to life. It was so much of a problem for his enemies that not only did they want to kill Jesus to try to shut this movement down, because by the time he raises Lazarus, a lot of people are starting to follow him, saying that he's the Messiah and the son of David. And so the people that were against him, which were mainly the power structure, they said, not only do we need to kill Jesus, we need to kill Lazarus too, because Lazarus is evidence of what he's done. And we have a copy of this dude's death certificate. And here he is walking around. We have a problem. And so it begins to create a divide between those that believe that Jesus was the Messiah, in spite of the fact that he's not raising an army, he's not making any political statements, he's not doing anything to try to resurrect the kingdom of Israel. He's talking about love and peace and these kind of things. And so one group is saying, there's no way you're the Messiah. The other group is saying, you are the Messiah, because nobody does what you do and can't be the Messiah. And so this is the real thing that really convinced at least his followers, and to some degree it emboldened his enemies. And that was when he was arrested. Remember, I told you, if you are a king, then the God behind you will not allow you to be hurt or harmed. How in the world could he allow himself? In fact, I think that Judas, everybody know who Judas was? Judas was a guy that betrayed him and turned him in. Judas thought and believed he was the Messiah, but he believed he was a Messiah like David, so that by setting him up and pushing him into this kind of a conflict, he would start to assert himself the way David would have, if you follow what I'm saying. It wasn't that he didn't believe in Jesus. I think that what he was looking for was a different kind of Messiah. And so I think in Judas's mind, Jesus would have started to now act like a real Messiah once he got his back against the wall. And when Jesus allowed himself to be arrested, to be scourged, to be mistreated, and then ultimately to be crucified, that messed up Judas's head, because he could not see how no other king of Israel that was really truly anointed by God ever would go through anything like that. You have a question?
So was he trying to make the situation better by having Jesus have more followers rather than
You talking about Judas?
Yes.
I think Judas was trying to push Jesus to start acting the way he thought he should act as a Messiah.
So that more people can follow him, believing him?
Well, no, not so much, because he had a pretty good following at this point. But the real deal was we're looking for a Messiah that's going to fight, not just going to preach. You know, we don't want a preacher. We want what's that dude that in World War II? We want what was his name? MacArthur. We want MacArthur. We don't want T.D. Jakes. We want MacArthur. We want MacArthur. We want somebody that's going to fight. We want somebody that's going to rally the troops and get Rome off our backs. We're looking for political salvation, not spiritual salvation. And I think Judas tried to push him into a corner. You know how, like, when you push the Hulk too far, you know, he says, don't do this. You're not going to like what, you know, and he becomes the Hulk. You know, I think that's what he was trying to do. I think he was trying to push Jesus into a place where Jesus would start throwing down like Samson. You know, when Samson got mad, Samson handled his business. 3,000 Philistines with a jawbone of an ass. You understand what I'm saying? So they're looking for that. He was looking for that kind of Messiah, and Jesus wasn't acting the way he thought he should act. You know, and he started predicting his own death and all this kind of stuff. And Peter himself said, no, Lord, that ain't going to happen. We ain't going to never let that happen to you. Yeah, we're not going to let that happen. And I mean, he was strapped when you know, he had a sword and everything. He ready to fight. He's a fisherman, don't even know how halfway to cut a decent fish. Now he's trying to fight a war. But that's what they were looking for. And so when he allowed himself to be arrested, to be tried, and to be crucified, that messed their heads up. No way a king allows himself to go through that. But according to the New Testament, and I got to remember, I'm in an academic setting, according to his followers, the third day he rose from the dead, which means that not only was he commanding authority over disease and trees and the winds and the waves, but death couldn't hold him either. And that really sold it for his followers. That really said that sealed it. That even after dying, death couldn't hold this Messiah. Okay? And that's the point where the disciples, after they came to the conclusion, according to their writings, that he was risen from the dead, then they really split off from Judaism. Judaism has never accepted Christ first as Messiah, and they say he didn't raise him. They said that his followers stole his body, and they started telling this myth that he had been raised from the dead and all that kind of stuff. All right? And so, yes, ma'am.
Okay, so he rose from the dead. I don't remember, but what happened to him after that? Like, did he...
I'm going to come to that.
Okay.
Before we get finished with that, let me just point out this statement in John 18, because this anointed idea of what the Messiah is in the conversation between him and Pilate before he goes to the cross. He says in John chapter 18, verses 36 and 37, he says, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place." 37, "You are a king then," said Pilate. Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. In fact, the reason that the reason that I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth that he is this Messiah king. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." And so he makes this statement basically saying, I am what I am. I'm the king, anointed. But see, he was not just a king. Let me see if I can say this right. He was both the king of Israel, but if you read the book of Romans, he was the king that replaced the first king. That's why I mentioned Adam, because what Adam lost, he was also called upon to restore. Now, can someone tell me, why was it so essential that he die, even though he was the Messiah? Because we already touched, yes.
Because of the blood that he shed to put in, to play the new covenant.
Exactly. It was necessary and predicted that he would be the covenant. So it is necessary for this Messiah, my servant, it was necessary for his death was necessary to inaugurate, to implement a different covenant. That's why the death was so necessary in my mind. And that's the New Testament, and that's the Christian version of things. Please understand. There are people that make this statement that Christianity and Judaism is pretty much the same thing, and that could not be further from the truth. Judaism and Christianity have different values, different theological positions. Christianity takes a very, as I mentioned, takes the position of peace and love, where Judaism still holds to a very harsh attitude with respect to sin and with respect to Gentiles, people that are not Jews. Okay? And so there's a very, I don't take this, people use the term Judeo-Christian values. There's no such thing as Judeo-Christian values. Values, Christian values and Jewish values do not mesh at all. Okay? That's just nonsense. All right? So you asked the question, so what happens afterwards? And so we have to talk about this because this is probably some of the stuff. What happens after this is that he begins to appear to his disciples. He has meetings with them and stuff. And he begins to let them know that he's leaving, but their responsibility now is to spread the teachings that he had been teaching them all along and begin this new movement to inviting people to receive him, receive the new covenant. I don't have time to go there, but there's a scripture that said that before he died, a few nights before he died, he had this, the word was in the movie Sacrament. You ever heard of a sacrament? He had this supper where he takes bread and breaks it, and then he hands it out and he said, "This is my body, which is broken for you." And then he has this cup with new wine in it, and he passes it around and said, "This is the blood of the new covenant, which has been shed for you." Okay? And so he begins to introduce all of these new concepts, and he basically inaugurates a new church. He's about 40 days after he was resurrected, he leaves, and he leaves it in the hands of his disciples to begin to teach about the things he's been talking about. About 50 days after he's resurrected, he ascends, there's this, they're meeting together in this room on the day of Pentecost. And on that day, according to the book of Acts, the Holy Spirit came into that room, shook the room, and they began to be empowered and emboldened to go all around Jerusalem and teach and preach about this new Messiah and heal and do all kind of things to give evidence of what this guy was about. And that was the beginning of this new church. Please note, all of the people that were part of this new church were Jews. Do you understand me? They were all Jews. There weren't any Gentiles at this point. As it continues to grow, the Jewish leaders start to try to squash this thing because they're looking kind of bad because they were complicit in this man's execution. And now this movement seems to be growing and they can't stop it. And so they start persecuting them. And a guy by the name of Saul, who was a young theologian and stuff, he takes it upon himself to start going everywhere he can to synagogue after synagogue and finding these people that are teaching this nonsense and putting them in jail and doing what he could. On his way to a synagogue in Damascus, he has an encounter with, he says, a vision of Jesus and he converts to Christianity. And this Saul changes his name to Paul and becomes one of the main evangelists for this new religion. And it begins to spread beyond Jerusalem into all of that region, and on and on and on until, it becomes a huge, it reaches all the way to Rome. Yes.
When you said Jews were like the new church, when the people who got the Holy Spirit on them.
They were all Jews. They weren't Gentiles.
So when you were talking about the Jews that think differently than the Christians, are those like different types of Jews?
No, when I say Jews and Christians, that's a good question. What I mean is that today the majority of believers or Christians are Gentiles. All right? Paul eventually started teaching Gentiles. But this is the point. The Jews that became Christians basically eventually would leave Judaism. When I mean by Jews, I'm talking about Judaism as a religion, as opposed to Christianity as a religion. What I'm saying is Judaism and Christianity are separate. And Jews that are in Judaism, they have a different ethic, they have a different value system, and so on, except for a few of them. I showed you guys the true Torah Jews the other day. Remember we talked about Zionism? They have a very peace and love kind of orientation as opposed to others, the more Zionist Jews. But Judaism and Christianity are separate. Do you follow what I'm saying? So I'm not saying, and there are Jews that accept Christ. They call themselves Messianic Jews. But the problem with some of these Messianic groups is that they're also Zionists. So I don't understand how you can be a Messianic Jew who believes that Jesus is the Messiah, yet you're believing that a Messiah is going to come and restore Israel. I don't know how you can do that.